So Black Myth Wukong is way bigger than I thought. Heading into its first chapters, it became immediately obvious there are lots of mechanics and secrets to look out for. So after 100 hours spent in the game, here are some of the biggest tips and tricks that I wish I knew the first time playing, and other things you'll probably want to know if you want to have the perfect start. Let's get started with the combat. It's fast, dynamic, and super fun, and the gist of it is that you're constantly going to want to use light attacks to build up your focus points, and then expand those points to unleash much more devastating heavy attacks. The more focus points you charge, the stronger those heavies will be, so it's sometimes smart to actually wait until you have filled at least 3 points to unleash truly upgraded versions of these that deal way more damage and also stun bosses. However, you can also hold down the heavy attack button to charge that focus manually, which can be super useful, especially at the start of fights. This is typically the way I like to enter in boss encounters. Besides this, every stance also has a quick heavy variant that you can chain right in the middle of a light combo, such as the Resolute Counterflow, Sweeping Gale, or Offense in Defense. Now these trigger almost instantaneously, can even provide extra effects such as auto parry, and are a great way to mix up the combat for even more damage. Now at the start of the game, you only have about 2 focus points active, but as you invest more points into the stances skill tree, up to 20 sparks, you're going to eventually unlock 3, even 4 at the maximum, which is how you're going to power up the damage on those heavies. I do have a couple of extra tips over here to make combat even faster. One is that your L2 or default mobile spin attack is not just there to deflect projectiles or arrows, it's also extremely good at building up your focus faster than anything. So whenever you have a boss downtime, you get it staggered or even get it stunned with Immobilize, try to just use that moment to build up your focus extremely fast. This is going to then let you follow up with your strongest attacks, and it's basically the best strategy I was able to use against even the toughest enemies. Another thing I suggest is using jumping light attacks followed immediately by a heavy while still in the air. This is a super strong combo, especially against targets that move too fast and are too mobile for their own good. Besides staggering them on the first hit, the heavy follow-up auto-tracks very well and doesn't even need a focus bar to actually be casted, but will still benefit from a damage power-up if you do have a few focus points active. Another thing I recommend is to keep mind of dodging. Perfect dodging in this game is very powerful and gives you complete iframes even against large AoE effects. Plus, it consumes no stamina unlike the regular dodges. And with so many attacks obviously telegraphed, you can pull it off so easily in most of the fights. Just keep in mind that both attacking and normal dodging, as well as sprinting and jumping, will consume stamina, so until you upgrade that or invest extra points to reduce the stamina cost, you will need to be careful about managing it. The worst thing you can do is panic dodge against most attacks, and then when you have a window of opportunity to be left with no stamina to do any attacks against the boss. And speaking of that, Black Myth Wukong really gets elevated to the next level with Nvidia GeForce 40 series graphics cards. I'm able to play at max settings and get the best performance thanks to Nvidia DLSS 3. This uses the power of AI frame generation to create entirely new frames, providing a huge boost in performance without sacrificing image quality. And speaking of quality, the game takes full advantage of the latest ray tracing tech. Like, I just can't get over the fact that water looks so realistic and so much more beautiful in this game, especially with light bouncing off its surface thanks to the ray traced caustics. That and ray traced reflections. The game features multi-bounce ray tracing lighting, which enhances the natural colors of the environment, rendering a much more realistic scene. You can also take full advantage of all this eye candy by just checking out the links down below and grabbing yourself the latest graphics card from Nvidia. Also, big thanks to Nvidia for hooking me up with a super early copy of the game and sponsoring today's video. And speaking of the stances, there are 3 of them in total, all with their own skill trees, and you should probably test them all. But what you should know also is that only the heavy attack component of it is unique to them. Your light attacks will always stay the same no matter what stance you switch to. So let's cover them quickly and what they are best against. We have the Smash stance, which is your starter, then we have the Pillar as well as the Thrust stance, and they all kind of fit different roles. So the Smash Heavy is a solid close to mid-range all-arounder that can also heal very well and can be used while sprinting. It's also very good at staggering enemies and one of the better options early on. Then we have the Thrust Heavy. This has a lot longer range. It kind of does this poke that reaches a bit further away than the Smash Heavy. Also has some dodges baked into it if you invest more points into its skill tree. And it's actually one of the best options in single target combat, especially against bosses. However, it can feel rather immobile at times, especially if you manually charge up its heavy, which I don't really recommend. Its normal heavy that you chain in the middle of light combos is much faster, especially if you combo this with a spear. Then we have the Pillar Stance. This is more about staying above the ground, avoiding damage, and following up with a well-timed hit, which has the longest range from all of the stances I've tested, assuming that you charge it to at least 3 of those focus bars. But it also features a close range AoE spin via the Sweeping Gale. It's actually a very good ability if you're fighting multiple enemies at the same time. So again, pick your poison, but the first two are my favorite. But moving on to exploration, like the reviews talked before, no, they were not wrong. Exploration is a huge part of this game, and you will find that only chapter 1 is a bit more linear. Literally everything past that is absolutely massive, like the worlds and the maps are super huge, very intertwined, and with a lot of places to go into. It's a very daunting task to actually discover all the secrets, and I'm not gonna lie, you're probably going to need some guides to go for 100% completion. So here are some of the telltale signs to look out for when in the world. First, always follow the sparkly trail. This usually leads you to Keeper Shrines, which are basically bonfires, and you really need them as this is where you will respawn in case of an early peril. Plus, you can rest here, fill up your potions, and even your chi, so it's very useful, and it's also the place you can do some crafting and fast traveling. Second of all, always, and I mean always, look out for these smaller incense containers and other similar boxes. More often than not, they give out celestial medicine, which are basically permanent upgrades to your HP, mana, and stamina. Later on, you will also find a special NPC named Shoe Dog to help you with creating more by using a resource called Mind Core. Third of all, you're also going to want to pay attention to treasure chests. They come in all different shapes and sizes, and they also tend to drop crafting resources as well as upgrade materials. So you can get stuff like silk, iron needed for crafting and upgrading gear, and oftentimes some of the other more rare resources such as the mind cores, which are useful to level up your stats, and especially so the ones we just talked about. And speaking of that, the fourth thing to look out for are this really high number of friendly NPCs. Pretty much every chapter has at least a couple of them. Not only do they unlock new mechanics for you, but they also are part of sometimes quite lengthy quest lines spanning over the course of multiple chapters. But they are always very rewarding in giving you unique stuff. This is how you, for example, unlock the player hub, medicine crafting, blacksmithing, some of the best items and armors. So always talk to them and be careful at what they say, but don't worry, we're gonna have a complete guide on that really soon. And besides this, generally just grab anything that's not glued to the ground, including plants and fruits. This is going to be very useful at crafting mortal medicine, but more on that in just a little bit. At number 4, another important aspect is bosses. This game doesn't just throw 80 plus bosses at you for the sake of it. There's a purpose behind this. And the biggest is being able to collect their essences and then use that as a unique skill in combat. So having this ability to summon them can be extremely helpful in combat. There's even builds you can create to have them summoned even more often. And you can do all of this as well as upgrading via the Cultivate Spirit mechanic. Now this provides extra effects if you also go ahead and upgrade these spirits, which you can, by the way, both with the will that you collect as well as special resources that drop from chests and when defeating bosses. So for example, you can reduce the chi cost of summoning them, you get bonus damage, bonus defenses, and other really cool effects, even like extra healing from one of these. For the most part, you activate them only for one attack as they don't really last too long, but that's really not a rule. There are some spirit transformations that can linger for a lot longer and can even perform multiple hits that can last quite a bit. Now, while there are dozens of such summons in the game, there are only about a handful of transformations in total. Some of them you can acquire from the main storyline, but some are acquired via secret side quests. So it starts with the Red Tides, which I recommend always getting, but there are many others, including the Azure form, which we've seen in some of the trailers, and a few special ones that I don't really want to spoil. You're going to be pleasantly surprised by quite a number of strong options that you get both from the story and side quests. So the way they are different is that they also have their own skill tree, and they also come with a might mechanic, which is basically their own stamina bar. So once you start using abilities such as attacks with them, you're going to start consuming it. So it becomes kind of like this balancing act of trying to stay alive, but also trying to unleash enough damage to charge up whatever meter it features onto the side. So it's not going to have the same focus points, but it's going to charge up a different mechanic that can be much stronger. Like for example, in the case of the Red Tides, you basically unleash a very strong fiery attacks, but others can have much stronger options and much better looking ones that can have different effects. This brings us to number 5, of course. All the combat would be in vain without upgrading your healing gourd. And this is basically your healing potion, but it goes like a few steps above your typical healing potion. So not only can you level this up to charge up and have even more charges, you can also have different gourds with unique effects that can provide extra healing over time, elemental resistances, even complete immunity or bonus damage. And then beyond this, there's one more step, which is the fact that you can have different drinks associated with the gourd and then have different soaks to have different effects for it. So let me explain. To increase the number of charges on your gourd, first you will need to look out for these yellow fragrant vines when exploring. Think of it as like the golden seeds from Elden Ring. You will need more and more of them for extra healing charges. And there's also an NPC called Shen Monkey in the Marsh of White Mist in chapter 1 who will help you with the upgrading part. Then we have the drinks, and the starting one is upgradable, but you can also find others, including of legendary quality, which will affect how much or in what way you get a heal. And for these drinks, you can then have a number of slots. For example, I found one with 3 slots, which was the highest I've seen in my playthrough, in which I can add extra soaks. And soaks is one of the other bonuses you can have on your healing flask, so that every time you heal, you can gain even more extra bonuses, such as extra mana, resistances, even power-up abilities, and I found a few that can even provide chances to drink without consuming charges, among other very powerful effects. So just like the gourd, drinks are also upgradable, in this case with wine worms that you will find in some of these glowing wine containers out in the world. Always worth it, always something that you should upgrade. Now, since we went over upgrading stuff, let's also talk about armor and weapon crafting, as well as one of the other things you can do. A major part of this game is actually finding armors and weapons, and no, you don't just find them from enemy bosses from the main story, you can also have them as random drops from just regular trash mobs. It can literally happen, so I don't really have a full list of all the items, but I do have some very good options coming up later in a different video early on. Now, most armors and weapons I unlocked were from defeating main story bosses, and for armors, it's almost always worth it to go for full sets, as the 2 and the 4 set bonuses are typically very strong. Like for example, early on, the Bronze Monkey set really helps a ton if you enjoy the Immobilize ability, as it further buffs up the damage on immobilized targets and even reduces the cooldown massively. So this literally can carry you all the way to the mid to late game. If you visit a blacksmith, you can also upgrade its quality by using the resources over here, which is going to further buff both of its rarity as well as the defenses and resistances on it. Weapons, on the other hand, are somewhat different in the way you craft and upgrade them, because they kind of feature this crafting tree with, separating branches. So you get a base weapon type, and then you'll see it featuring a branching tree with different possible types to build from it. Typically, you will unlock additional types of weapons to unlock in this specific branch by just fighting bosses and progressing in the story. So it's a great way to have your early weapon progress into something that's really strong, but you still get to keep both of the options, both of those weapons in your inventory to switch between later. And it's not just that, you're not just stuck with going into one single upgrade branch. You can actually build on either side of the branch, assuming that you got the resources for them, so you can always switch between them no matter what. Such weapons also require a unique item that you need to find in order to craft them, typically that 1 out of 1 listed above the crafting blueprint. And I found quite a few by just going from main boss to main boss, but a lot can be found by exploring as well, sometimes even as singular pickable items. At number 7, absolutely do not overlook buffs. Mortal medicine is very important, not just the celestial medicine, so this is one of the things that you should always have carrying at you, and I recommend the following 3 early on potions. One is the amplification palette, which gives you about 10% extra critical hit chance, and it's very easy to get, plus it eventually gets more rare variants. Also the tiger subduing palettes, which boosts damage, and I also like mixing in an evil repellent medicament for some extra defenses. And you will need most of the plants you find very early on anyway, such as the snake head mushrooms, which is this small amalgamation of shrooms that you can find all over. Also aged ginseng, which is from these red plants, and then the purple lingji, which kind of resembles a larger and flatter sort of mushroom you can again find near puddles of water. So it's always good to have a few of them and pop some of these right before a boss fight. They tend to last for a very long time, sometimes even for the entire duration, which is extremely helpful as there are no better items early on to give you such high bonuses. Eventually, epic and legendary variants also open up, become available, or can be purchasable from various vendors, providing even more damage bonuses and other strong effects. Quick side note about celestial medicine, it's not just the one that you find in small containers that upgrades your stats permanently, you can also craft your own variants of it. And you can even permanently upgrade more than HP, mana, or stamina. You can do it with pretty much all other stats, such as defenses, resistances, or even critical chance and damage. And for that, you're going to need some of these mind cores, as well as having aided Shoe Dog up until he unlocks his ability over at the cellar. In this case, you have to start right here in chapter 2 at the village entrance, go down this path to the right side, and you're going to find him right here for the first time. He's going to require you to aid him in defeating a boss nearby, which is basically this electric frog, just a bit further away from him. Once you do that, this is going to unlock its first part. From here, you will need to progress normally up until the Crouching Tiger Temple, defeat the boss inside, and then right behind him, you're going to see there's this statue, and you can interact with it now to basically open up this tiger mouth that leads to a secret cellar below. So simply progress over here all the way at the end, take up the slide, and once you reach the save point, you're going to notice that, yeah, Shoe Dog will now spawn very close to this cauldron. And from this point on, he's going to unlock medicine crafting for you, both celestial as well as mortal medicine. So now you can both have the permanent upgrades as well as having all of those buffs ahead of combat. But this game is all about experimentation and having a ton of available skills. So you're not just bound to your choices, which is why at number 8, the next tip is to constantly try to switch out your loadout if you see your current one doesn't work for you. Especially since the game encourages it, at secret shrines you can easily just reset all of your skill points at no cost by going into the self-advanced section and choose to reignite the sparks. Plus you cannot lose the sparks at all. So you can reset all at once, only one category or even one skill at a time. And early on, it's a good idea to experiment with different sorts of builds that you might like. Like I said, Smash Stance for me was really good early on, but then I noticed that the Thrust Stance can also be very strong if you get a special weapon. So you can just mix and match these and see which work for you best. Typically, I would focus on only one stance at a time early on, since you don't have too many points to go too deep into their skill trees, and it would be a shame to not go deep in them since they can provide some very strong effects, especially that Smash Stance can give you a ton of damage. And the remaining sparks, I typically go into upgrading active skills. So if you like Immobilize, definitely go with it. It's insanely strong and you can make it last even longer and give you other bonuses. But you can again mix and match different stances should you need to. At number 9, another thing to keep an eye out for are meditation spots. This is a good way to just take a break and admire the beautiful artwork of the game, but they also provide extra sparks and also fully replenish everything, just like in the case of a Seeker Shrine. And typically there are anywhere between 3 to 5 meditation spots in every chapter, which you can easily check from the journal menu right here in case you have missed any of them. And this is, by the way, also a good way, for example, to scout out and see if you missed out any areas. If you don't see all of them active, like 5 out of 5 in this category, it means you still have some exploration to do. Which brings us to number 10 and the final tip, and that is don't worry too much about missing out on stuff. You can both go back via fast traveling to previous chapter locations without having any worry. Plus, it doesn't seem that there's anything time limited, or at the very least not as much as it was in Elden Ring. Plus, once you finish the game, you also get New Game Plus, which lets you again repeat all of these things. I'm pretty sure that in one single playthrough, it's almost impossible to get everything, at least at this stage, or at least until we get to play a lot more of Black Myth Wukong and see exactly which path leads to which secret. So in the meantime, don't worry about it. Try to do as much as you can, but also enjoy and have fun. At the end of the day, that's the reason you're playing. And this pretty much concludes today's video. Of course, lots more following soon, including some of the best things to get early. So totally check those and also stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel and activate that notification bell. And I'll see you guys in the next video.